It's time for Maxwell's House, episode 51. Ray's going to talk about the scientific method and his usual potpourri of madness. Maxwell's House is coming up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Maxwell's House is brought to you by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Maxwell's House with Ray Maxwell, episode 51 for December 12th, 2009, The Scientific Method. Maxwell's House is brought to you by the new voice-activated Sync, featuring hands-free calling, music search, and turn-by-turn navigation. Available exclusively on Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury vehicles. For more details, visit syncmyridepodcast.com. It's time for Maxwell's House, the show that covers all of the latest, greatest stuff inside Ray Maxwell's mind. Inside the mind of Maxwell. I have another way to characterize it, Ray, because it's not a science show exclusively. It's not about Photoshop exclusively. It's not about color science exclusively. It's just whatever you're interested in.
There you go.
Well, that's not a bad thing, to be honest with you. I think that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
We shall see.
Well, when we put it out there as a podcast, we'll get numbers and find out just how many. But the IRC chats group is always good to me, and I do get a regular batch of email at ray.twittv.tv. Ray@twit.tv.
We should mention this show has been around for a year, but has only now become a podcast, and so there's a lot of episodes under the water, over the hill. But we've been doing this now as a podcast for a couple of episodes. We're really glad you're here, and you can watch us do it live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern time. At live.twit.tv, and participate in the chat room. It's really this is one of the shows where really the chat's very involved. That's irc.twit.tv. And you know, Ray, we found a really good way. We used it with Amber on Tuesday to take calls and have phone calls during the show. So anytime you want to do that, we can start doing that.
All right, we'll start doing it, because I think that would be a lot of fun.
People I know would love to talk to you. So good. All right, so plan on that starting next week. We'll use Twalkin. TWALKIN, and I think we'll be using that today with Kiki, so you can. Oh, good. Yeah, you can watch us. Right after this show, you can watch and see how it works, so that we can do it on your show.
Right. By the way, speaking of email that I got, I heard from a mutual acquaintance of ours, Sean Carruthers, the other day.
Sean was one of the producers of Call for Help in Toronto, moved out with us to Vancouver for the Lab with Lou.
Yeah.
Great guy. What's he up to?
Well, he now, doggone, I've forgotten the name of the show. He told me what he's working
Butterscotch.
on.
He does Lab Rats.
That's it. But he and Matt are both Matt Harris.
Yep.
And I've heard heard them on a few times, and one of their friends heard my show where I told about how to modify the QuickTime Player and QuickTime 7 in Snow Leopard, and he wrote me and said, "We can't remember what episode. How do you do that?" So I sent him a pointer to Odd TV and told him what the time code was, and he went in and wrote me back and told me what he was up to and so forth. So.
They'll definitely do a how-to. That's one of the things they specialize in is helping. The old call for help thing of helping people. Get the most out of their personal confuser, as we used to call it. So I'm sure that's what they wanted to know that for.
Well, let me jump into the news this week, because I got an email from a fan who pointed me to avweb.com, and they had a store. They published both the official paperwork taking away the licenses of the pilots that were flying Northwest Flight 188 that overflew Minneapolis, with the specific charges they have been the reasons why they lost their licenses. And then it had their replies, and you can download both of those in PDF and read them for yourself. But in essence, the pilot said, well, the air traffic control has to share in this, which I'm sorry, I don't buy into that at all. If you don't hear from air traffic control for 91 minutes, you're asleep.
Didn't ATC say they had been trying to get a hold of them too? I mean,
yes. Oh, yeah. And they've got the recordings to prove it. And by the way, you can play back the recordings of what ATC was trying to do. The pertinent recordings are on this same site. And then the pilot said, "Oh, and by the way, I was the PNF, which is the pilot not flying." That's an official term in the cockpit, and usually the first officer and the pilot take turns doing the landings and the takeoffs, and the person who does not have their hands on the controls is called the PNF, pilot not flying, and he runs checklists or manipulates landing gears, flaps, the other ancillary controls in the cockpit. So he was saying, "Oh, I'm the captain, but I wasn't I wasn't really flying the plane." Well, come on, you're the captain. The buck stops there. In my opinion, he should just, say, "Sorry, sir, I made a mistake," and let it go at that. But of course, he's a career guy who stands to lose his license. Although they've said in the charges that they were suspending his license at least initially for 1 year.
Oh, he didn't lose it. I thought he was going to lose it.
Well, he has lost it until further notice. There will be further hearings, but it's gone for a year for sure, no matter what, as my understanding, until they either restore it or come up with a final ruling. So that's happening. Another thing I discovered in the last week, much to my chagrin, is, I had upgraded to Snow Leopard. And I have an older wide format printer, an expensive wide format printer, an Epson Stylus Pro 4000. And after I upgraded, I had read where people were having trouble printing from this printer, and I printed from it. But I just did some normal text printing, and it worked fine. And I thought, oh, what are they talking about? It works fine. Well, I went the other day to print some, serious 1620 prints of mine, and the color was not a little off. It was off by a country mile. It was super dark. It was terrible. And so I'm a little chagrined because Epson and Apple, is a $2,000 printer that's less than 5 years old. I don't know. It's about 4. And, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, you spent a lot of money. It's
right. And I can't, print to it now. Now, I don't expect to buy printers as often as I do CPUs and whatnot. But luckily, I have an older computer sitting down here beside the new Mac Pro. I have an old Mac Pro, with a dual G4 500, and I just put it on the network and put put my disk that has the file I want to print, and I print from it, and it prints just fine because I'm running Photoshop CS2 on it. And
you're popping a lot on that mic. If you can point it somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just put it down.
It's probably because you're saying print so often.
Yeah, it's probably. Yeah.
Print.
Got to get a screen here
Pop
one
filter.
of these days.
Yeah, I'm missing mine too. I got to get because I got this new gold mic, but I wanted a gold pop filter. So I can't.
Yeah, you got to have a gold pop filter.
Hey, speaking of gold, there's something in the shot of you that we don't normally see all the time, and it kind of drew my eye a little bit. You
mean the little statue
thing? Yeah, that little statue that's behind you there. It looks a lot like, it couldn't be, but an Emmy Award.
Dane is such a nice guy.
He sent you an Emmy?
Well, he looked around the studio there, and 50 shows. He said, well, what could I send Ray that would,
He sent you my Emmy?
I was waiting. This was a test of your observation skills, Leo.
I saw it right away. I just didn't want to interrupt you. Believe me, there's something about an Emmy that grabs the eye.
Yeah, well, I thought you might notice it. You see, I have a neighbor who has an incredible sense of humor. And this neighbor is a director and producer of a number of fairly well-known television shows.
Yeah, because that's a U.S. Emmy. I don't think they have the Emmy in Canada.
Right. And it turns out that he and I were standing in the cul-de-sac. I was telling him about Twit TV, and I was telling him about you and that you had an Emmy. And he says, "Hey, Ray, let's have some fun." So I'll loan you my Emmy and, put it in the shot and see how long it takes Leo to notice it.
I saw it the minute I pulled you up. Particularly because your Emmy is so much bigger than my Emmy, and I'm a little. I don't. It doesn't seem right. That's a national Emmy. That's the one with the big round base, and the regional Emmys, which this is for the West Coast, is not quite so big.
Right. Well, it turns out that he told me, he said, I can't turn this face on so it says who it is and what it's for. That they have a restriction on that. So I can't tell you the details of that particular statuette. But let me tell you something. I have this neighbor, and he has directed such people as John Belushi, John Candy, Martin Short, and they were all on a certain Canadian-produced...
I know exactly what show you're going to say. Well, you can't say.
Yeah, I can't say.
I know what you're referring to, though. So he was the director of that show?
He was the director.
One of my all-time favorite, the best show. I just adored that show.
Right. And he has directed many other amusing shows, I'll just leave it that way, since that time. And both in Canada and in L.A. So he has a sense of humor, and when he and I are standing in the cul-de-sac trying to think up some mischief,
you thought it up. Well, and as they're saying in the chat room, I have Emmy envy, so they're absolutely right.
Well, anyway, it worked. It was great.
Doesn't it look good on a shelf? It's just such a naturally gorgeous thing to have. Now, if you show up with an Oscar next week, I'm going to be a little suspicious.
Well, we'll see. My humorous neighbor. All right. The next thing on my agenda, outside of the show, keep an eye on Luminous Landscape. That's Michael Reichman's site. You'll see a book review in there by me and an article on a book entitled CMYK 2.0. I actually reviewed it on our show here earlier, but I wrote up a nice article about the history of CMYK printing. So if you're a photographer, if you're a designer, and you'd like to know the proper workflow for taking digital photographs all the way through to offset presses, this is a review and points you to a book that tells you exactly how to do it in the modern way.
Excellent.
So that's a little plug for something coming up. Now then, let's get to the main topic.
Well, before we do,
all right,
let's get to our Ford Sync commercial.
Oh,
yes,
certainly.
You have a little advertisement in the show, my friend.
Great.
Our friends at Ford, they're the ones who do this amazing in-car computer called Ford Sync. You can get it in Canada. I'm sure you can. It's at Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury vehicles. And it is just, it's clearly the next generation in automotive computers. There's been computers in cars, doing the fuel ignition and fuel mixture and the ignition and all that stuff for some time. But this is a computer for the users, for the drivers, the people in the car. And it is just fantastic. It's all voice activated. And that's important because, people always say, well, you can't put a computer in the car. It's not safe. Well, you're right. Ford Sync lets you keep your hands on the wheel, your eyes on the road, so you're safe, but you still have control of everything. Actually, I have I have a video I shot in my car this morning of the Ford Sync. Let me see if I can find it here. I was having so much fun playing around with this. You can do things like, say, play a song. You can say things like, Well, I'll show you. Let me just show you real quickly. I'll just pull this up in my MacBook here. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. And this video that I made. There is the sync. Now, my sync is a little bit different because it's whoops, whoa, hey, come back here, video. It's the one that where's the controller? Did they hide the controller, or is this just such high res video that I don't see it anymore? I wanted to jump ahead a little bit. Let me go to full screen here. There it is. It's hidden up here. I'm going to jump ahead and show you what I did. This is kind of cool. So the idea is you press a button on your steering wheel. Here, let me show you the steering wheel. There it is. That's the button on the steering wheel. You press that button on the steering wheel, and that signals the Ford Sync to pay attention. Now, I have a screen in mind. Not all the Ford Syncs have screens, but watch this. This is kind of cool. I get 5-day weather forecast. I've got movie times, fuel prices. But this is the one that I kind of like. Here we go. Watch this.
This is a fun one, too. Watch this. Climate. Temperature 74.
Temperature 74. Is that correct?
Yes.
It sets the temperature in my car. I just love this thing. Your car is responsive to you, but you never have to look down at the screen. You never have to look away. You can get GPS directions. You control your MP3 player. And by the way, anything with a USB cable will work just fine. It has an audio jack if you don't have a USB interface, but it works with my Droid. It works with my iPhone, my iPods. It even works with the Nokia N900, which I just got. Ford Sync. I want you to take a look at it. Here's a couple of things you can do. Go to the website, syncmyridepodcast.com, and learn more about Sync. But you can also go to your Ford, Lincoln, or Mercury dealer and say, I want to test drive, but I'm not going to drive the car. I want to test drive the Sync. It's really, really cool. They plan to offer an SDK and have applications starting next year. They're open sourcing it. They really get it. Ford really gets it, and I really love what they're doing. Check it out, syncmyridepodcast.com. We thank them for their support. You hear that little in the video? You know what that is? Yeah. Stupid autofocus on the camera. I'm turning that off. You can hear the motor in the autofocus. I was using the Olympus EP1, which I still love, by the way. Great camera. Right. And you see this is 720p high-def video. I mean, it's really good video. But I had the focus on continuous, so I'm just going to make it single autofocus. Because you can hear the autofocus motor. That's a design flaw, I would say.
Can you put an external mic on it?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. USB AV out? No. Yeah, I don't think they have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
That is.
Yeah, I guess it's just, the mic's right here on the front of the camera.
Okay.
All right, science. Body, what is it? Body science. Of knowledge or way? Or
a way of thinking about the things, the world, natural world around us. And my favorite definition of science is it's an algorithm or a method or a way to think that keeps you from lying to yourself.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's a way to understand the natural world around you.
The people who created the scientific method, I mean, obviously in the Dark Ages, we didn't have it.
No.
Was it Newton? Does it go back that far?
I'm not sure. I think it goes back earlier than that to some of the earlier possible Greek philosophers or something, but I'm not sure, Leo.
But clearly they didn't trust, and I think this was the right thing. They didn't trust instinct. They didn't trust common sense. We didn't trust ourselves. So you have to come up with a method that kind of prevents lying to yourself, just as you say.
Right. Well, now there is a distinction between philosophy and science. And it's taken me most of my life to figure that one out. I kept asking everybody, give me a clear definition of philosophy. And as near as I am able, this is Ray Maxwell's definition of philosophy. It is the attempt to rationally think about a thing and decide what is correct or true. But it doesn't involve experiments. It may involve observation of the world around us, but we then, use our brains to say, I think this is how this works. And science goes one step further. In science, we observe the world and we see something that we think is strange, or that we want to know, well, why does that work? What's the cause and effect here? Then we put forth a hypothesis. We guess at what makes this thing work. And then, and this is the key of science, you have to be able to perform an experiment that can either prove it to be true or falsify it. So if your hypothesis is something that you cannot falsify, you're not doing science. So, if I said, I believe, or, my hypothesis is there is other life in the universe. Mm-hmm. Well, now, since I cannot visit all the other places in the universe and say, let's see, is there life here? Let's see, let's lift up and look at that planet. Is there life there?
It's unprovable, you're saying.
It's unprovable, so I can't falsify it. So right now, currently, I can't answer that question scientifically. I can speculate. I can put forth lots of theories. I'd rather use, rather than theory, I'd rather use hypothesis, because there's many theories that there's a lot of proof for. And that's another misuse of the term theory. When people talk about the theory, evolution is only a theory. Well, there's an enormous amount of science to back it up. And the theory of gravity. Well, if gravity's only a theory, the next time you fall off of something.
But isn't there a distinction between the theory of gravity and evolution? I mean, theory of gravity, you could it's a theory about how gravity works, but there's no question that gravity exists.
Well, it's because
we may not correctly understand how it works, however.
Right. But everybody can conduct a real quick experiment and say yes or no. And so everybody's comfortable with that theory. The theory of evolution requires a broader understanding of many, many different fields, because, the background for evolution involves biology, even some sociology, anthropology, paleontology, right. And so to really get the big picture on it, you have to have a much broader understanding. It's not as easy to test for the typical person. Mm-hmm. And so it's tougher. Now, if I said my hypothesis is I will drop an object and it will fall to the ground, now that I can, if I drop something and it didn't fall to the ground, I falsified it.
Right.
But so I can test that theory real easily. But that's a key thing. The other thing that's often put forward in science is Occam's razor, which basically says the simplest explanation is usually the best. This is a rule of thumb. It's not hard and fast. Sometimes the explanation is quite complex, but most of the time, if there is a very simple explanation, it is usually the most reliable explanation. If there is an explanation that fits all the facts and fits the results of the experiments. So now science makes an assumption that some people disagree with, and that assumption is that the world is objective and consistent around us, that the laws of physics are consistent, and they're consistent anywhere in the universe. And some people will agree with that, some people won't. It's not, I don't think it's actually, we make that assumption, but I don't think that particular hypothesis is completely provable or falsifiable. Right now, we're having some very interesting discussions about dark energy and dark matter and whether it exists or whether we have some perceptual problem or some part of relativity that we don't understand. But I don't want to go too deep into that or get too far out today, because I want to bring us back to some very simple things. And some. I do want to point out that I think one of the beauties of the internet is we now have a movement, I believe, in the world, and I will label it the skeptics groups that have arisen in the world that are advocating logical, rational, and scientific thinking. And there are a number of magazines, Skeptical Inquirer, and the other one, I've forgotten the other one. There's another one, Skeptic Magazine, I believe. But there are a number of podcasts, and I listen to these other podcasts.
Skepticality, yeah.
Yeah, Derek and Swoopy. I think they put on a wonderful podcast, quite entertaining, very interesting guests. Point of Inquiry is another one. And then the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. These are wonderful podcasts, and there are a number of others. But and then I reported in one of my shows going to a local Skeptic camp here in Vancouver,
right?
And it was wonderful. So I'm encouraged that there are people connecting via the internet and attempting to advocate people think in a logical, rational, and scientific way, and questioning when people don't. Now, there's a difference between a skeptic and a debunker. A debunker or cynic or whatever may just be very negative, but a skeptic has an open mind. Said, prove it. If you make extreme claims, then, show me. In my case, I always say, show me. I'm from Missouri originally. But now let me give you an example of how simple science can be. And I want to tell you the story about Emily Rosa. Emily Rosa was I think she was 9 or 10 years old when this all started. Her mother was a nurse. And there is a movement in the U.S. and Canada amongst nurses. There's a particular nurse that started teaching a thing called therapeutic touch. And first of all, I find the name interesting because they don't touch you. They believe that they can detect with their hands, and some say they can see a human energy field around a person, and that you have an aura. And they can see this aura or feel the aura without touching you, moving their hands around you, and that they can massage your aura and increase the energy flow in your body and help heal you. So Emily Rosa, this young girl, her mother brought home a video about this because her mother was a nurse. And the girl was working on a science project, and she was doing statistical sampling of M&Ms in a bowl. And she was doing this science project. And she said, well, wait a minute. Mom, do you really think that this energy field thing is true? And her mother said, well, I don't know. We need to run. Maybe you could think up a way to test this. So this little girl, through her mother, contacted 21 practitioners of therapeutic touch and enlisted them to come and let her test them. Because one of the things, the key thing, is that they could detect this human energy field with their hands. So the little girl took a cardboard box, large one, and she cut 2 holes in the cardboard box where the practitioners could put their hands through the holes, palm up. And then she sat on the other side of the cardboard box, and she flipped. Oh, first of all, before she put up the cardboard box, she said, I want you to put your hands over my hands and tell me which of my hands has the strongest energy field, or which hand would you like me to use? Because I'm only going to use one hand in this experiment, and you choose the hand that I should choose. Because some of them said, well, your right hand has a stronger field, or your left hand, or what have you. So that's what she did. Then she put up the box. They put their hands through the holes in the box so they could not see her. And then she flipped a coin, and based on the coin, she would wave her hand over one of their hands. And then she would ask, which hand are you detecting my energy field with? And she did this, I believe, 20 times for each practitioner, and then wrote down the result. And she did this for 21 different people. So she had a fairly large sample size. Now, the results were that they guessed correctly in her tests 44% of the time. They didn't hit 50%.
Which is, 50 would be the statistical average if you just threw a dart, right? I mean, just random, right?
Pure random chance.
So they actually did worse than chance.
But again, within the
within the variation, yeah.
That's within the variation. Yeah. So it's not that they did worse than chance. They did exactly, more or less, from a statistician's point of view, what you would get from chance. If you increase the sample size, it would again approach 50%. But then this little girl and her mother a doctor found out about her test, reviewed very carefully her methodology, what she had done, and he helped her write a paper, a formal scientific paper.
Neat. That's good.
Her paper was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. That is a very prestigious, peer-reviewed medical journal. And there were other people who conducted this test as well. At the end of their paper in the the Journal of American Medical Association, I shall read their final statement in their paper. To our knowledge, no other objective quantitative study involving more than a few therapeutic touch practitioners have been published, and no well-designed study demonstrates any health benefit from therapeutic touch. These facts, together with our experimental findings, suggest that therapeutic touch claims are groundless and that further use of therapeutic touch by health professionals is unjustified. There you are.
That's the scientific method.
That's the scientific method.
In action.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you, I'll digress a moment, and I'll tell you a story about how I encountered this, but I have to give you a little background, because I have encountered therapeutic touch personally. Being a pilot, I went to a safety seminar for pilots, and it turns out that you can induce what's called nystagmus, or vertigo, while flying in instrument conditions. Now, this comes from a disturbance to your semicircular canals. So, now, let me tell you why this is important in flying and in your general well-being. If I look right into the camera and I shake my head back and forth very quickly, you'll notice my eyes stay right on the camera. Now, the way that happens is my semicircular canals are hardwired directly to the muscles in my eyes. In other words, it doesn't have to go through my conscious mind. And when the fluids in those semicircular canals start to go back and forth, it sends signals to my eye muscles to hold my eye on the object. So if your head is moving and you're trying to hold your eyes fixed on a particular object, you can do it because of this mechanism. Now, in flying, if you are in a turn and you drop something on the floor and you duck your head down to pick it up and then swing your head back up suddenly, you can induce what's called nystagmus, or spill your gyros. And if that happens, your eyes start to flick like this, and you can't focus on the instrument panel. And that's serious when you're in instrument flying conditions.
I bet.
So they actually demonstrated this for us in this safety seminar that I went to. They put a guy in a chair and they started to spin him around, and they had a hood on his head with 2 lights in it, something for his eyes to stare at. And he had his hand out in front of him, and he would point the direction he thought he was being turned. And so when they first started turning him, he pointed in the correct direction, and they accelerated and they had him going around very fast, and then they started to slow him down, still going the same way, and he started to point the other way, because his senses were, giving him wrong information without information to his eyes. And then very suddenly, the fellow operating this test stopped the chair very suddenly, jerked the hood off his head, and his eyes went into nystagmus. They started to flicker back and forth, left and right, and if he was flying an airplane, he would not be able to focus on the instrument panel.
Interesting, huh?
Because it's an involuntary thing.
Right.
Well, many years after taking that seminar, I woke up one morning, and my wife was on a trip, and I was home alone. And when I opened my eyes were in nystagmus. And the room wouldn't... It reminded me of a sign I saw in a bar once that said, "Please do not stand up while room is in motion."
I've been in in that bar.
and I couldn't focus, and it makes
I've never had that happen. That's so weird.
It turns out that the other way of getting nystagmus is a little virus can get into your semicircular canals and irritate the sensors and throw them off. And I am here to tell you, it is very disturbing, and it makes you sick as a dog because, it's like having motion sickness. And so I closed my eyes and sat up in bed, and every time I opened my eyes, I started getting sicker and sicker, and I finally reached for the phone and called an ambulance, and they came out and picked me up because I couldn't navigate. I couldn't get up and walk. But the good news is I knew exactly what was happening because of this training.
By the way, our eye doctor, Mark Sekernig, who is in the chat room, says it's pronounced nystagmus.
Nystagmus. Thank you.
Ray's from Missouri. He doesn't pronounce any word like we do.
I'm from the Ozarks. I'm a hillbilly.
That's how they say it in the Ozarks. But thank you, Mark, for correcting that.
Yes.
Nystagmus.
Nystagmus. I stand corrected. But what had happened is I had this training, so I knew that I wasn't losing my mind, or that that I didn't have a brain tumor, or something horrible like that. And by the way, there are other things that can cause it. And they put me through when I got to emergency, they put me through a set of neurological tests and said, oh, this is definitely a virus in your semicircular canals. Now, the doctor that I had, it was quite interesting. He told me, he said, now, let me tell you, he said, first of all, just so you know, he said, I've suffered from this. I've had this once in my life. And he said, it's really frightening. And he said, now here's the good news and the bad news. Most of the time, it lasts 48 hours and goes away.
Okay. That's the good news.
Yeah. If it doesn't go away in 48 hours, it usually lasts 2 weeks.
Ooh, that wouldn't be fun.
No. Well, I've had the former, and it went away, and it's never come back. And
so it's a little virus that causes it.
Yeah. It's an irritation, and I've never had it reoccur, and I've never had any more trouble with it. Of course, if it had reoccurred on a regular basis, I would have problems being a pilot.
Yeah.
But it never came back. It never bothered me again, and I was fine. And like I say, it went away in 48 hours. They gave me some medication that dulls the nerve endings or whatever, and I was able to walk later that same day.
Wow.
And a friend came and picked me up, took me home, and I still was somewhat nauseous, but I could get around, and within 48 hours it went away completely. But it wasn't fun. Now, how does this tie in? When I was in the emergency room waiting for the doctor, a nurse came in who had been trained in therapeutic touch.
Oh boy.
And
so in the hospital, they actually pay somebody to do this.
Well, in California, they require that nurses take so much training every 2 years or something. And one of the courses that is accredited
so bogus
is therapeutic touch.
I'm sorry, but that's just so bogus. I think the onus really should not be on us to prove it doesn't work, but it should be on them to prove that it does work.
Precisely.
Because, I mean, on the face of it, it's absurd.
Yeah.
I'm going to wave my hands around and you're going to feel better.
Yeah. Please. She came in and she said, oh, your aura is disturbed. She's waving her hands, She said, I'm going to massage your aura. And I, being a nice guy, thought, Ray, just sit here quietly.
Right.
And, let it pass and don't say anything.
Paging Uri Geller.
The only problem was she was waving her hands in front of my eyes.
Oh, good.
And so I was already nauseous, and this motion was
I hope you barfed on her shoes.
Was making me sicker. And I finally said, I'm sorry, please stop. The motion in front of my eyes is making it worse.
Oh,
but I didn't say, I think this is a crock. And furthermore, a 10-year-old proved that it's a crock.
Yeah.
But, this is what we're up against.
Well, people want to, it's surprising because we haven't made so much progress from frankly, the Dark Ages. This is medieval in its you might as well talk about dark humors.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you got too much phlegm. We're going to bleed you, Ray.
Yeah. But, it's been, they should have to prove that it does have some therapeutic value.
Although somebody's pointing out in the chat room that I believe that the Higgs boson is keeping the Large Hadron Collider from working, and that's probably very, very similarly medieval.
Yeah.
I don't actually believe that,
so.
By the way. I just like the idea.
Yes, it's fun to play with.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you another news story that was on CNN in the last few days, and I wanted to throw something through the television when I saw it.
CNN's getting more and more tabloid, and I think it's the pressure from Fox, to be honest.
Yeah. But a doctor, the woman, I can't think of her name. No, this was on MSNBC. Sorry.
Same thing on the left. They're just becoming these partisan
this story
crazies.
I think this was on all of them. I think the story, but it wasn't delivered by a doctor. But in MSNBC, it was this woman doctor. Okay, here's the story. There's a person who has been in a, quote, persistent vegetative state.
Yeah, I know this one,
23 years.
Everybody bought this one.
Yeah. And they had a person beside this person called a communications facilitator. It's doing what's called facilitated communication. And she grabs this person's hand and over a keyboard, and suddenly, with her assistance, she claims she can detect a slight motion in this person's hand.
It's in a Ouija board.
Yeah.
And as we all know, you steer the Ouija board with unconscious movements. Somebody said this would be great if they had a person who didn't speak the language of I can't remember where this guy was it Czechoslovakia or somewhere. If they had somebody who didn't speak the language he was speaking do this, so that there was no way that it could accidentally be steering it, right? Well,
there's several ways to test it. The most draconian would be to blindfold them.
Right. But everybody knows where the keys are, so...
Yeah. So they can't see which key they're hitting.
Right.
And all they can do is feel the person's hand.
Right.
But there's another way. Let's go back to the little 10-year-old. And by the way, let me go back. Let me tell you some history about facilitated communication, because if you know this history, you'll be furious. About, 10 or 15 years ago, this facilitated communications came on the scene, and they were using it with severely autistic and severely mentally disabled people who were unable to communicate. Now, keep in mind, there are people that are unable to communicate that think clearly, and they can look at a screen. And I'm not talking about those people. And it follows their eyes, and they can type and they can communicate, but they're doing it entirely on their own with the help of a machine. There's no other human being involved. So, years ago, this assisted communication with these communications facilitator people started helping these people that were severely disabled and supposedly couldn't communicate. Suddenly they could communicate. Suddenly they could write books. But the worst of it was, with the help of one of these facilitators, a young girl, with the facilitator's help, said, "My father is molesting me."
Oh, boy.
The father was taken to court based on this facilitated communication. The father was convinced that maybe he didn't know that he was doing it.
Right.
Finally, someone stepped forward and said, there's a very, very easy way to test this. And it takes all of the brains of this 10-year-old that did the therapeutic touch. What they did is, again, they created a cardboard box or what have you, and they took objects or words on cards and put them in front of the disabled person in such a way that the facilitator could not see the object or the word. And then they simply ask, what is this object or what is this word? Suddenly, it didn't work.
Oh, it stopped working, did it?
It stopped working.
Golly, it must be because they were so skeptical. They ruined the vibes.
Now, let me explain something that I think is very important to understand. some of the facilitators were blown away by this.
They were surprised.
They really believed that they were doing this. They didn't
Of course
even
they did.
realize
Yes.
that they were the ones that were creating the communications. And this is called, historically called, the clever hands effect.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this?
Well, no,
now
but I've
hands-
used a
hands-
Ouija board, and I know exactly what it is, because if you're on a Ouija board, it does not feel like you're steering it. It does not.
Right. So these people, what I'm saying is some of these facilitators are not malicious charlatans.
No, they're acting out of good faith.
Right. But and they were blown away that it wasn't real. And many of them were really crushed because they thought they were doing this wonderful, helpful thing to this severely disabled person. So once again, there are ways for severely disabled people who have cognitive skills to communicate, and I am not talking about them. I have met them. I work with them in my flying program. I have one fellow that I take up in the glider who cannot communicate, but he communicates with a keyboard.
Yeah, and if it's
he does
legitimate, then these simple tests will validate it.
Exactly.
And it's not too much to ask, just to
Right.
eliminate the possibility of human failing and foibles.
And how difficult is it to run that kind of test?
Well, it turns out in
it's-
some cases it's trivial.
It's absolutely trivial. So when this most recent case of this fellow that was in a vegetative state for 23 years came on all the news media, the only person that I've heard of so far that raised an objection was James Randi from the James Randi Educational Foundation.
Randy, the amazing Randy's always been really on the forefront of this great stuff.
Right, and he
Just great.
participated in some of those early tests where there were these court cases and stuff, and totally and completely proved that they were false. And he was just furious that the news media would publish this story without any testing or questioning of what's going on here. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know, but I know that it's easy to test, and then you find out, is the facilitator doing the
It was
communicating?
really quite amazing. It struck me as very gullible how all of these people, and they were so anxious to say, see, you could be in a persistent vegetative state and for 20 years and still be aware and cognizant. And people just really wanted to believe that, I think.
Of course. And of course, it also immediately there were people who jumped on it and referred back to the Terry Schiavo case.
Yep.
Where see?
Yep.
See?
She
You
could have been
guys-
aware.
Yeah. And, come on. There's ways of testing this. It's very, very straightforward. If you have some skepticism and understand the scientific method, you can do it.
So, to our knowledge, this facilitated communications claim was not tested with this guy, right? It was just accepted. It's a shame because who knows? I mean, maybe the guy was aware, but we won't know.
Well, precisely. That's what I'm saying. I don't know that he isn't. I just know that it hasn't been tested. Now, the other thing that I know from observing the tape, and this is what James Randi said, he said, if you look at the tape, first of all, this person is going really fast, and you can see the facilitator staring at the keyboard, and the person whose hand is being moved looks like they're asleep. Their eyes are closed.
Yeah.
Now, come on. Come on.
It's a little suspicious. Just a little. Just a little.
But why not run this very simple test, with where you essentially blind the facilitator to what the answer to the question is and ask the person a few questions. And then you know real quickly, is this the facilitator you're communicating with or is this the person? And again, I'm not saying that the facilitator is a malicious charlatan. They may think that they are communicating. That was the case in this earlier set of studies. These people were genuine in wanting to help these people. So,
I am disappointed, though, I was really disappointed at how all the media outlets, it wasn't just MSNBC, everybody treated it the same way.
right.
There was just no questioning at all. No
question.
And then later you started to see, I think somewhere somebody said something and people started saying, oh, facilitated communication. Oh, maybe this isn't what we think. But there were no retractions anywhere or anything.
It was debunked 15 years ago or so.
Yeah.
and you know, overturned a number of legal cases and things that were based on it. That's what floored me, is they took this to the courtroom and based testimony in a courtroom on it without any testing. Yeah. You know, that in itself is criminal.
Yep.
In my book.
Yep.
All right, to wrap up today, let me flip up. If you'll flip up my screen, I want to point people to another YouTube thing. I want to run over real quickly. A fellow has created a YouTube. His name is Greg Cravens. And if you do a search on YouTube videos for Greg Cravens, and you look up what's the worst that could happen. By the way, he's done a bunch of YouTube things. But what he's doing is proposing a risk analysis method that I think is worthy of your consideration. Will I tell you that it works 100%? Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to leave it up to you. But he took the subject of global warming, and he said, look, global warming is a terribly complex issue, and we may not be able, because it is of its high complexity, predict exactly when the effects will happen, and of course some of them are already happening, but we may not be able to predict the final outcome. And he said, you know, it's great being debated and politically. He said, well, let's have a look. So he builds a matrix, a little 4x4 matrix here. And on down this side, the subject in this case is global warming. And he says, now let's assume in the top part here that the hypothesis that global warming is caused by human beings and that there's nothing we can do about it. Let's say that that's false. That there is something we can do about it, sorry. So global, you know, the statement is global warming is caused by human beings and there's something we can do about it. If that is false or true, we come down here. And the first, and then what action are we going to take? Are we going to take action? Yes, we will take action and try and prevent it. Or no, we don't take action and don't try and prevent it. Now, he asked the question, what is the worst that can happen? Because he's in a risk analysis, you want to know, you know, of your choices that you have here, what's the score? So the four possibilities here are that global warming is caused by human beings is false, and that you do something about it, or you don't do something about it, or it's true and you do something about it, or you don't do something about it. So here are the four possible worst cases. He comes up here and he says, if you do something about it, in other words, you change our economy, you put money and dollars into preventing it, and you change our behavior and you do all these things, there's a financial cost to that. And it could, worst case, cause a global depression. That's a possibility. It would cause us to all have less money because we spent it on this thing. And if it's false, we spent it for nothing. On the other hand, if it's true and we spend the same amount of money, we save the earth and things get better. Now, the next thing is we do nothing. If it's false,
hooray!
Hooray!
I'm glad I bought that Mustang after all.
Right. We didn't spend any money. Everything's lovely. And then B.
Ooh, that's not so good.
Catastrophe, economic catastrophe, political, environment, health, real bad news things. Now,
you just put the day after tomorrow there. That's just...
Yeah. Now, in his presentation and in his book, and he has published a book on this topic, and by the way, he first published this first YouTube scenario, and then he asked people, he said, if you have any bones to pick with this, please write me. And thousands of people did.
I bet he heard from some people. Yeah.
And he did another 8 hours of YouTube presentations basically discussing each of these thoughts. And then he put this book together that, brings up all the other people's arguments. And the key thing is he doesn't tell you what you should do after you look at this matrix. It's up to you.
You decide.
You decide.
See, I've looked at that. I've always thought of that as frankly as the choice.
Mm-hmm.
And It seems pretty straightforward to me. And I think also even the upper left, global warming false, but you take action anyway, isn't necessarily a complete loss, because you can, build sustainable energy sources and so forth. In the long run, that give you a benefit whether or not there's a problem with global warming.
Well, precisely. There are many people who say, "Look, you could." But he's taking
less
worst
pollution
case.
isn't so bad,
Yeah, less pollution, jobs in the green sector,
right.
New technology and so forth. Those things are not all bad. But he's saying, okay, let's take worst case though. Worst case would be that some of these things don't work. They cost more than we think they would, and that it costs us money. That's worst case. We say, that it's there and it's not, and we spent all this money.
Yeah, I never understood why people were so anxious that, we better not do this. It seemed like the risks of not doing it, if it's true, are so much higher than the risks of doing it and it's not true. But
key thing, he does not say that. He does not.
No, he says nothing. I understand. Yeah, that's good.
He's just saying, draw the matrix, fill in the blanks for yourself,
right,
and decide. Now, let me bring up another one here. I brought up one with blanks.
Oh, this is good. Yeah.
Should I go get a vaccine shot? So, action A is that I could go and be vaccinated. Action B is I could do nothing.
Right.
If there is no threat, that the H1N1 virus,
Let me tell you, I have a friend who's just recovering from whooping cough.
Yeah.
And he, like you and I and everybody of our generation, got vaccinated, but he's our age, and the vaccine kind of after a while wears off.
Mm-hmm.
He says you don't ever want to get whooping cough, and he said because people are not getting vaccinated for pertussis anymore, a lot of them, he got it, and he said it was the worst 3 weeks of his life, and he's still weakened. And he says this is a horrible, horrible thing to get.
Well, you're supposed to get a booster shot every 10 years.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Maybe he didn't get his booster.
Yeah,
I always get I get my DPT booster, believe me.
Right. I was lucky when I was reminded of that. It was the year 2000. So guess when I get my next one?
You get your next year.
Next year. I got it. I got it on the decade years. So now it's real easy for me to remember.
We have a family member who doesn't believe in vaccinating her kids, and her kids got whooping cough, and it was nightmare. So I could fill in the do nothing, graph. And admittedly, there's a 1 in a 10 million risk that the vaccine could do something bad to you. It's a very low number,
right?
But boy, the very, very real risk if people don't get vaccinated, if these diseases spreading.
Well,
these are not.
I've left this blank on purpose. You fill in your own assessment of each of these 4 possible actions and 4 possible outcomes to the scientific information. The science is right, the science is wrong, and what the risk level in each one is. But this makes you put it down and stare at it and make some kind of rational decision, because doing nothing is a rational, is a decision. And
and this gets back to your original point about the scientific method, is that what we think of as common sense and intuitive, instinctive thinking is often really wrong-headed. And just some little guidelines as to do this kind of in a logical fashion can really change your point of view.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that's my my kick at the can today, Leo.
And a good way to put it.
Now I'll return my Emmy to my neighbor.
I'm keeping mine. He can't have it back. All right, Ray. Hey, it's great to talk to you. We'll see you don't forget, every Thursday we do this at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. It's Maxwell's House. You can watch it now live as we do it, live.twit.tv. On twit.tv, the website, and soon to be a podcast coming to a browser near you.
Super. Is Kiki in house?
Kiki's here.
Good.
We're ready to begin Kiki's Funhouse with somebody you might be interested in, Ray. The science comedian you were quoting from.
Oh, wonderful.
Last week is here.
Fantastic.
So a little science comedy coming up. Yeah.
That's right.
So
Ray stole your jokes.
I stole a couple of your jokes. I love them.
Only the really bad ones. A virus walks into a bar. Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. I have to say.
But I must say I gave you full credit.
He did. And actually it was perfect because we knew you were coming in. Thanks, Ray. We'll talk again next week on Maxwell's
All right.
House.
Bye for now.